Hi everyone, hope you're all well and welcome to the City of London Cemetery. Now I have covered other parts of this cemetery before in 3 separate coverages, so if that's something you're interested in that you've not seen, go on YouTube, type in City of London Cemetery, London Luke, and you'll see those. But today we're covering different areas and some very interesting graves as well. But for a bit of brief history, in 1849 William Haywood, Chief Engineer of the City of London Commissioners of Sewers, reported on the condition of the city's churchyards and their health risks. The commissioners were responsible for public hygiene and sanitation and were in effect also the burial board for the City of London. Due to an Act of Parliament in 1852, the commissioners directed that the cemetery be built for the city's 106 parishes, to replace interment burial within the confines of those city parishes. In 1853 this led to the purchase of land owned by the 2nd Duke of Wellington, forming most of the manor of Aldersbrook. This former farmland was sold to the corporation for £30,721 and the cemetery was founded in 1854. It was laid out in 1855 by William Haywood, and the first interment was on the 24th of June 1856. Although the cemetery was not consecrated until late November 1857 due to legal difficulties, which were solved by the Burial Act of 1857. So now I'm going to show you from the burial register that first burial entry. Then after that you'll join me inside the cemetery as we see the tomb of its creator. Then opposite his tomb is his friend and colleague, who is also big in improving the health and whatnot of London, so you'll see those two. Then after that I'm going to take you to different parts of the cemetery. Now I can't walk you to the other graves because they are so far apart, one on one side of this vast cemetery and one on the other. So I'll give you square and grave numbers in case you wish to visit yourself. But to film the walks to and from would take up the better part of a video, which is why I'm going to do it that way. So join me inside the cemetery as we see the grave of its founder, which to see you walk straight in through the gate and it is just a little way in on the left. And here we see the cemetery and its gatehouse when it was newly opened in 1856. City of London Cemetery, Mr. William Haywood, architect. And as promised, I'd show you the first burial entry, and it's of course burial number 1. June the 24th, 1856, Abraham Wall of 5 Suffolk Street, Bethnal Green. He was aged 16 years. He was buried in Square 41, grave number 1, sadly long since gone because it was a 2nd class common interment, unconsecrated, because you have to remember the cemetery wasn't consecrated until late November 1857. The ceremony was performed by James Woodard, and remarks are Mary Wall, mother, father dead. So that's our little bit of opening history. To come to his grave you walk through the gate and just walk straight down. And here we are at the tomb of the man who founded and laid out this cemetery, William Haywood. I'll show you his inscription first, which is just round the side. Within this tomb lie the ashes of Lieutenant Colonel William Haywood, once commander of the London Volunteer Rifle Brigade. He was by profession an architect and engineer, and designed and laid out this cemetery. Born on the 21st of December 1821, he was born in Camberwell by the way, and died on the, is that the 13th or 18th? 13th of April 1894. He died in Maida Vale. He was cremated at Woking on the 18th of April 1894, and it's a fairly early cremation really, because cremation, you have to bear in mind, didn't become legal in this country until 1885. It was in 1885 that cremation became a legal way of disposal of the dead. And I'll walk you around the opposite side to show you his wife's inscription. Here also lie the ashes of Jemima Emma Haywood, born 6th of June 1841 and died on the 10th of May 1896, cremated at Woking on the 15th of May 1896. And I'll take you to the front of the tomb, because inside it are busts of the couple themselves. And there you have them, William and Jemima, William Haywood. And it's architecturally interesting itself, this one, with a replica kind of hammer beam roof, lovely tiles. One last look at the couple themselves, although you will see images towards the end of this bit of the video. Engineer and architect and surveyor to the City of London Commissioners of Sewers, a pioneer of cemetery reform, he was with Joseph Bazalgette responsible for the enormous undertaking of improving London's sewerage system, which enabled the growth of the city. The City of London Cemetery was conceived by him as a way of relieving the appalling overcrowding of London's church burial grounds, described in Charles Dickens' Bleak House. 200 acres of ground near Epping Forest were purchased by the city to carry out Haywood's idea, and the resulting cemetery is still one of the finest in the country, beautifully maintained with extensive gardens and still very much in use. As we discussed, the first burial in the new cemetery took place in 1856, and as the city was redeveloped, the remains from many of its churchyards who were formerly buried there were reinterred here, and that's another video you'll be seeing parts of, with just some of those who were taken up from old London churchyards and crypts and moved here. And I'll show you next, without stopping the video to show you images of William first, I'll show you next his colleague and friend, who is buried just here, and they were friends as well as colleagues, working together with the improvement of London's sewerage systems and London's health. And this is the family vault of William Sedgwick Saunders, in memory of William Sedgwick Saunders, medical officer of health for the City of London. And interestingly enough, he was the first medical officer for health for the City of London, entered into rest on the 18th of January 1901, aged 76 years, on whose soul may Jesus have mercy. And some information on William Sedgwick Saunders. William Sedgwick Saunders, he served as the City of London's first medical officer for health from 1874 until his death. He implemented numerous public health improvements in the city, including sewerage and garbage disposal, and combating diseases such as cholera. He was also involved with the investigation of the Jack the Ripper cases. So that's interesting, isn't it? And if you walk around the back of the tomb, I assume that this lady is his wife. Elizabeth Drury died 26th of August 1902, aged 67 years. R.I.P. And now, after this little snippet, I'll show you pictures of William Haywood, who created the cemetery. and William Sedgwick Saunders, who's his friend and colleague. So you're going to see those now. I do love to put faces to names, and I did say to you that I would show you the face of the man who's really responsible for the City of London Cemetery, particularly for its layout and much of its architecture. And this is him when he was still a Lieutenant Colonel. Lieutenant Colonel William Haywood. And this is him again, Mr. William Haywood. And of course, as well, being the creator of the City of London Cemetery, he worked closely alongside Joseph Bazalgette, improving London's sewerage, which allowed the city to grow. And he was also the engineer of Holborn Viaduct, which is still very much with us today. And here we see it, the royal procession under Holborn Viaduct in 1869 from the Illustrated London News. And his friend and colleague, I wanted to show them together, William Sedgwick Saunders, medical doctor, officer of health for the City of London, and he was indeed London's first officer of health, and as well as improving the health conditions of London in many ways, he also played a large role in the Jack the Ripper investigations. So that's the two faces of the two friends and colleagues who are buried opposite each other. And on with our tour we go. Hope you all found that interesting and enjoyed seeing the faces. I like to put a face to a name wherever possible. And from here you're going to join me right over on the opposite side of the cemetery. I will give grave numbers in case you want to go and visit these graves yourself. And then after that you'll be joining me right on the opposite side of the cemetery. So join me at our next one. I've now brought you to our next last resting place, which is behind the back of the traditional church. And to give you details, in case you want to visit yourself, it's square 81, grave 54518. And erected to the memory of Elizabeth Ann Everest, who died the 3rd of July 1895, aged 62 years. And it was erected by Winston Spencer Churchill and his brother John Spencer Churchill. Now I'll just pause you while I get my notes out and give you some details about this lady. Elizabeth Ann Everest was an English folk figure and Winston Churchill's nanny. He addressed her as womb, which was the nearest he could get to saying woman. She was born in Chatham in Kent, and so far as is known she was never married, so the title Mrs. may well have been an honorary one. Churchill wrote in his autobiography, My Early Life, "I loved my mother dearly, but at a distance. My nurse was my confidant. Mrs. Everest, it was Mrs. Everest who looked after me and tended all my wants. It was to her that I poured out all my many troubles. Before she came to us, she had brought up for 12 years a little girl called Ella. Beg your pardon, the sun's shining really brightly on my phone, so that's why I'm struggling to read it. The daughter of a clergyman who lived in Cumberland. She went into service with the Churchill family in early 1875, a few months after Winston Churchill's birth, and remained with them until 1893. When she died at her sister's house, 15 Crouch Hill, North London, Churchill telegraphed the clergyman I've already mentioned, whose daughter she'd raised, the Venerable Thompson Phillips, in Barrow-in-Furness. Churchill wrote, he had a long memory for faithful service. We met at the graveside, and he had become an archdeacon. He did not bring little Ella with him. Churchill paid for the headstone. His son Randall wrote in the first volume of the biography of his father, for many years afterwards he paid an annual sum to a local florist to upkeep the grave. The same book states that the headstone bears Churchill's name alongside that of his brother John Spencer Churchill, nicknamed Jack, but this part with John Spencer Churchill's name can no longer be seen. You see where it says and, so Winston Spencer Churchill and John Spencer Churchill. And this is the grave of who we shall call Nanny Everest, who's basically responsible for raising Winston Churchill and his brother. Some historical imagery will now feature, and then you'll see Nanny Everest's burial entry from the burial register. And then after that you'll be joining me right on the opposite side of the cemetery for two graves who are both buried side by side and both tragically died in the same incident. So that will be on right on the opposite side of the cemetery, and as with this one I'll give you square and grave number in case you want to come and visit yourself. But now for some historical imagery and the burial entry of Elizabeth Ann Everest, who we shall call Nanny Everest, who died on the 3rd of July 1895, aged 62 years. And here she is, the lady herself, Elizabeth Ann Everest, or Nanny Everest, or Womb as the infant Winston Churchill called her, and the man himself, Sir Winston Churchill. I wanted to show them together because both played obviously an integral role in each other's lives, and Winston clearly never forgot her because he paid for the grave in which she's in and the gravestone, and even paid for a local florist to maintain that grave many years after she'd died. And here is her burial entry, marked with the arrow, and she was buried just 2 days after she died, on the 5th of July 1895, Elizabeth Ann Everest, and her address, she died at her sister's house, which was 15 Crouch Hill, Finsbury Park. Her age on the gravestone is recorded as 62, but in the burial register she's marked down as 61, and the district in which her death was registered was Upper Holloway, which was Middlesex in those days, and the parish from which she came was St Mary's, and Winston did well by her because she was given a first-class grave and burial. So there you see the face of Elizabeth Ann Everest alongside that of Sir Winston Churchill. Hope you all found that interesting. It's nice to put a face to a name, and we know for certainty that on the day she was buried that Winston Churchill stood in this spot and would have said goodbye to the lady who raised him, who he probably loved more deeply than his own mother. So that's Nanny Everest's grave for you, and you're now going to join me right on the opposite side of the cemetery over that way. So as I said in my intro, to walk you to and from these graves would take a whole video in itself. So you'll join me at the grave, and then you'll get grave numbers and square numbers in case you want to come and visit yourself. I'll see you all there. And this is the grave just here with the surnames Tucker and Bentley. And to give you an idea of where we are, it's square 264, grave 59678, and buried right next to him 59679. Sacred to the memory of Sergeants Charles Tucker, aged 47, and Robert Bentley, aged 37, interred here, and Constable Walter Charles Choate, aged 34, interred at Byfleet. Members of the City of London Police killed in the execution of their duty while endeavouring to apprehend a number of armed burglars in Exchange Buildings, Cutler Street, EC, on the 16th of December 1910. In appreciation of their devotion to duty, this monument is erected by the Police Committee and by police officers and constables, City of London Police Force, faithful to death. And I've just got my notes out on my other phone, and luckily I'm in the shade so I can read them now. Murder victims of City of London policemen was killed in the execution of their duty while endeavouring to apprehend a number of armed burglars in Exchange Buildings, Cutler Street. And this is the interesting bit as well, what I wanted to add. The burglars were actually Russian anarchists who later held a shootout at the Siege of Sidney Street in 1911. So that's the extra bit of information I wanted to tell you. There will of course be images of these men featuring at the end of this piece, but they are not buried alone, they're buried with family members. So if we walk around the side of Sergeant Tucker's last resting place. Also interred here, Charles Wesley Tucker, born 23rd of February 1893, died 17th of November 1925, son of the late Sergeant Charles Tucker. Also interred here, Amelia Tucker, born 25th of May 1868, died 27th of September 1931, widow of the late Sergeant Charles Tucker. And we walk back round the front and then round the side of Sergeant Bentley's grave. Also interred here, Robert Eric Alfred Bentley, born 21st of December 1910, died 4th of April 1914, son of the late Sergeant Robert Bentley. So they're buried with family members, so they're not alone. And J. Druitt was the one responsible for this stone. So sad business with police sergeants murdered in the course of their duty by Russian anarchists who later went on to have a shootout in the Siege of Sidney Street. So that's dark but interesting history. Now after this we'll feature some images of both these men and hopefully an image of Walter Charles Choate, who is buried at Byfleet. So join me for that now, and then after that you'll join me at another part of the cemetery. And the faces of each of the police officers that were killed doing their duty on that night. And this is Police Sergeant Charles Tucker, and he was killed at the incident on the 16th of December 1910, whereas his two colleagues died the day afterwards from their injuries on the 17th of December 1910. Police Sergeant Robert Bentley and Police Constable Walter Charles Choate, who isn't buried in the grave of his colleagues but is quite rightly mentioned along with them because it was that incident that took his life. And here's an artist's impression from the Daily Graphic, December the 18th, 1910, showing the incident. And here are the principal locations of the crime scene. Top right with the arrow is the house from which the shots were fired, and bottom right with the arrow is the shop of Mr. Harris. And here is a view of the old Exchange building looking towards Cutler Street, and it was at this building that our police officers tried to apprehend these burglars, who would turn out to be Russian anarchists, and we'll learn a little bit more about that in a minute. But nothing of that time remains nowadays, and this is Costa Coffee, which occupies the location of Mr. Harris's shop in Houndsditch now. And although nothing of that time remains, Cutler Street, our men are still commemorated, and quite rightly so, with a bronze plaque, which I will show you a bit better now. Near this spot on the 16th of December 1910, 3 City of London police officers were fatally wounded whilst preventing a robbery 119 Houndsditch in commemoration of Sergeant Robert Bentley, Sergeant Charles Tucker and PC Walter C. Choate, whose courage and sense of duty will not be forgotten. And this is an original memorial card from the time commemorating each of our men. This is what the undertakers provided. And you can see their pictures there. Sergeant Charles Tucker, PC Walter Charles Choate and Sergeant Robert Bentley. And for our two men who are actually buried in that grave, this is their original burial entry from the City of London Cemetery burial registers, and both men were buried on the 22nd of December 1910, both marked with the arrows. Charles Tucker, and his address was 16 Douglas Buildings, Bethnal Green. He was aged 46 years. And his colleague just below, Robert Bentley, and his address was 66 Leopold Buildings, and that is Columbia Road, and his age was 36 years. And they did well by them, because the grave that they're in is a first class consecrated grave. It goes in classes of first, second and third, so basically they received the best that you could get, as you can tell by the headstone. And let us remember these three brave men who died doing their duty, and this incident was the precursor to what became the Siege of Sidney Street. I mentioned the Russian anarchists. They were tracked down to Sidney Street and a siege took place, and you're going to see some silent video footage from the time showing that now. Didn't muck about in those days, did we? And the man being pointed out with the arrow in the top hat and fur-trimmed collared coat is Winston Churchill, who was Home Secretary at the time, and he was present at the whole of the incident. hope you all found that interesting as we say goodbye to Sergeant Tucker, Sergeant Bentley and Sergeant Choate. Now you'll join me in another part of the cemetery. And just a little way back down the road, and this is Southgate Road, from our murdered police sergeants, on my way to their graves, I found this interesting one. The Sach, or Sack family, S-A-C-H the surname is, in loving memory of Mary, wife of Henry Sach, who died 20th of November 1887. Neither shall there be any more pain. And this is the inscription I found very interesting. Also of William Henry Sach, telegraph engineer and superintendent for many years on the GER, husband of the above, who died the 3rd of October 1889, aged 60 years, deeply lamented by his family and staff. Man goeth forth unto his work and to his labour until the evening. And then also of Henry George Sach, only son of the above, 46 years in the service of the GER, who died the 29th of November 1920, aged 65 years, much beloved. And also of Kate Harriet Sach, youngest daughter of the above, who died the 16th of January 1939, aged 79 years. So I did find that very interesting, that both father and son served for many years on the GER, and the father was a telegraph engineer. So that one did interest me, it was the one I wanted to include. I will look online and see if there are any images of them. If there are, that will feature now. If not, you'll join me in a particular part of the cemetery as we finish off this tour. And to end us off on this tour, I bring us back to the tomb of the man who is responsible for this cemetery, William Haywood, engineer and architect, and this is where his cremated remains lie resting along with his wife. And I've done this because it gives you a good trajectory for our next video where we're heading, which takes an entire video all of its own. So it will be the catacombs, and to get to them you walk down this road, you turn right, you walk past the modern crematorium, and you'll be looking right at the catacombs. So join me there for the next video for that.